Good morning, grade 10s. We are done with European history for the term, or for the year. Rather, we are going to move on to South African history. We're going to start with political changes in South Africa between 1750 and 1820. And this is part 1 of that video. Now, South Africa 1750 was not the South Africa that we know today. South Africa that we know today only came into existence in 1910 when South Africa became a union. Now, before that, South Africa was territories, it was colonies, it was independent republics, and it was quite a history to get South Africa from 1750, which there was only one colony, which was the Cape Colony, to a unified country in 1910. We're going to start looking at that process, and we're first going to see at where South Africa was in 1750 and which people were living where in the country. So, in the Cape, we had the Dutch. They controlled the Cape, and they were starting to expand north into what is today the Northern Cape, and to the east to what today is the Western Cape, going into the Eastern Cape. The Khoi and the San was there and thereabouts. They lived up in the dry northern and western regions of South Africa, today the Kalahari. The rest of South Africa were inhabited by small groups of farmers that migrated south from Central Africa between about 200 to 600 AD. They made pottery, they melted iron, and they are referred to as the Iron Age farmers. By 1750, there were several hundred communities all over the interior, and they were ruled by independent chiefs. Now, the chief's success largely depended on whether he could provide fertile soil for his community. If it was a good year and there was lots of rain and everybody could plant and everybody was happy, then the chief was safe. If, however, that did not happen and the chief was seen as being a bad omen, then they very quickly got rid of him, and they then appointed another chief that in their mind would then do a better job. And if that chief was lucky and it had a good year and it was raining and everybody was happy, and so it went with the chiefs. It was quite a difficult job, I suppose, to be a chief, because if it didn't rain, then your head was on the chopping block. And what we have here is just to give you an indication of how people lived during the Iron Age, the Iron Age farmers. That is some stone walls, that's leftover stone walls from a settlement or a village. Most of the housing, the huts, were made out of clay, sticks and clay. Can be quite large, well constructed, but the walls around the village and in between the huts and so on were made out of stone. Those are packed stone walls. They have no mortar, no cement in between. They were literally packed layer on layer on layer. So it's quite an artful to pack it like that. There's some Iron Age tools. As you can see, that is wrought iron. There is some blades. This was used to till the earth. And then there is some weaponry as well, mostly used for hunting. Some spears, some arrow points. Of course, this was an important thing. This was the furnace in which the iron was melted. Now, what you would do is you would put the iron ore. This is normal iron ore. It wasn't really mined. It was picked up, and it was put inside the clay oven. And this was then where you attached a big bag, usually made of animal skin, which you would then pump. You would pump it up, and then you would blow it. And then you would heat the fire to a temperature that the iron would start melting. And the iron would then run out of the other side into a mold that would then form whatever implement it was that you needed to make. So these ovens were all over the place, and a lot of time was spent creating all these, all the equipment and all the different heads, arrowheads, and so on and so forth. Then, of course, pottery was very important, because all the cups, saucers that we have today, plates and bowls, and pots and everything were made out of clay. It was pottery, but this pottery was fired. In other words, it was put into an oven, not unlike this one, and it became very hard, and it could last for quite a long time. Now, depending on what you are going to do with it, depending on how much effort you put into it. If it was just a bowl that you use every day to eat your mealie-pap with, then it is not going to be the best quality. So if it falls, it breaks, it doesn't matter, you make another one. But some of them were ceremonial, some of them were for beer. Those were very important, those were very well made. So that's some of the implements that they used at the time. This is an aerial photograph of a Iron Age village, taken from quite high up there. You can see those stone walls. And these are all stone walls. This is the leftover, the ruins of an Iron Age village. You can see it could be quite big. Some of these villages had up to 15, 16, almost 20,000 people living there. And not like today we have 6 million people living in Gauteng, but it was for the time, it was quite big. Also, Iron Age people did also do rock art, especially the sand and the koi. But ordinary Iron Age farmers also sometimes drew on rocks, and we call that rock art. Usually it was red ochre, and also other natural things. Obviously they didn't have paint. Charcoal that they used to draw on especially cave walls to depict scenes of daily life. It was my art. We like to take photos today. They didn't have cameras or cell phones, so they drew their daily lives on a rock somewhere. And some of it's still in existence today, and we can see it, we can look at it. Now let's look at the classifications. Let's look at the different people that we had at the time. We had the 4 main groups of people, the Nguni people, and they were divided into the northern and the southern Nguni, the Venda people, the Tsonga people, and the Sotho people. And all of them divided into their different categories. But that is sort of the main groups of people that we still have in South Africa today. But obviously there is now subdivisions. Under the Nguni, we've got many people, Swati people, Zulu people, and so on. Alright, guys, activity 1, page 106, that you will find on the Google Classroom, and please, you need to hand that in if you haven't done so yet. Please do it, either take a photo of it and send it in, or do it on the Word document that I posted. Right, but we're going to move on and do up until the next activity in this little session. Okay. We're going to look at the expansion of the southern Tswana chiefdoms in the interior. Now, the southern Tswana, that was between the Vaal and the Kalahari, so it is that area there, or northwest, no? That's where we found the Tswana people. Right, now these people included the Bafokeng, the Bahurutsi, the Bakgatla, the Bakwena, and the Baralong. Historians now believe that there was growing conflict among them. There is several theories about the causes of this conflict. As always, we're not sure, because there was no written records kept, or very few. It's only a couple of people, especially from Germany, that was doing work for the church, that had some written comments, but very few of them. So now, one theory was that there was an increase in the rainfall of the area. This led to the population expanding because more livestock and maize production means more people, means more babies will survive, and that means the population will become larger. However, rainfall pattern doesn't last, and this one didn't last, and as the fertile soil now became less again, this led to famine, people going hungry, and that led to conflict over the fertile land. Another theory is that the conflict started due to an increase in trade. The Tswana traded with the Muslim traders from the north. Beads, glass beads were found to support this, and glass beads weren't made in South Africa. They were made in northern Africa, where there's lots of sand in the Sahara Desert. They also traded with the koi and the sand in the south, and because of that there was an influx of guns and horses. So this led to, the moment you introduce guns into any situation, it tends to deteriorate. As a result, some chiefs became rich, and started to expand their chiefdoms, and this led to conflict. Third theory is that the Tswana people were raided by the Khoi and the San from the south. They were joined by runaway slaves who had guns and horses, and these slaves, as we know, came from the Cape. These were slaves that came in from Malaysia. We will talk about that a little bit later. But some of them obviously going to run away. And it was also raised by the Kora and the Griqua people. We will look at those groups later as well. The whole area became unstable because of these raids. The Tswana people formed larger and more powerful chiefdoms and to counter these attacks. Right, then examples of these chiefdoms that became more powerful is the Bankawetsi. In the northeast region, controlled the trade in the Upper Mariko under the leadership of Makaba from about 1719 to 1824. The Batlaping in the southwest began to control the trade to the Cape. And then the most powerful chiefdom at the time was the Bahurutsi. And they were close to Pretoria, where Pretoria is today, in Gauteng. And the center of the chiefdom was a town called Kaditsweni. It had about 15,000 inhabitants, which was equal to the Cape Town inhabitants at the time. So we can see that the Tswana people started to take over, and there were certain groupings. And what's important to realize here is that instead of the small farming communities and the small villages that we had, now people started clustering together into 3 bigger groupings. And people started moving to those groupings because they were more secure in a bigger grouping. And we will see that this was going to be the trend that was going to happen throughout Southern Africa or South Africa. All right. Okay, guys, activity 2. That's also in the Google Classroom. That's the mind map. Now you need to draw a mind map. The instructions in your textbook. How to do it, and you also need to hand that in. I think that needs to be handed in tomorrow, on Friday. It needs to be handed in. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys.